In the winter of 1974, a heavy snowstorm cut off this small village in rural Vermont for nearly a week. In a house tucked deep into the woods, a 19-year-old college student named Martha Whitmore was waiting for the thaw. When the roads finally cleared, police arrived at her apartment for a wellness check. The front door was double-bolted from the inside. The windows were locked. There were no signs of a struggle, no footprints in the fresh snow, and no logical way to exit the building. But the apartment was empty. Every mirror in the apartment had been shattered, their shards covering the floors of every room. The only exception was the bathroom. There, the glass remained intact, carrying a message scrawled in thick black ink. "The door is open." Local investigators hit a dead end because they were searching for a physical intruder who had broken into the home. They were looking for a crime scene when they should have been looking for a ritual Martha performed 7 days earlier. That ritual is a piece of forbidden folklore known as the Black Hour. It targets something far older than a typical haunting. The goal is to call an entity out of the reflection, something that supposedly exists in the space between our world and the glass. To understand how Martha vanished from a locked room, we have to trace the internal logic of this ritual back to its origins in the 19th century. The first documented accounts of the ritual surfaced in the 1800s, appearing in isolated farming communities across Romania, Germany, and northern France. At the time, rural families treated mirrors with genuine suspicion. They believed reflective surfaces were literal gateways, and it was mandatory to cover every mirror in a home during a funeral to prevent a soul from wandering into the glass and becoming trapped. This fear centered on a phenomenon called the Black Hour, a specific window of time where the night becomes unnaturally silent. When the wind dies down and the local wildlife goes still, it was believed the barrier between realities had weakened. In the early 20th century, European immigrants carried this fear across the Atlantic, where the legend took root in the small, forested towns of New England and the Midwest. Over several generations, the original warnings were forgotten. By the middle of the century, the superstition had been stripped of its cultural weight, and American teenagers began treating the invocation as a test of courage. Turning the warning into a game didn't make the ritual any less potent. Instead, it moved the practice from a passive fear into an active, dangerous invitation. The execution of the ritual requires absolute stillness. At exactly 3:33 a.m., the participant must sit alone in a dark room, illuminated by only a single candle placed before a mirror. You stare directly into your own reflection for 60 seconds without blinking. Then you repeat the phrase, "I open the door between shadows," 3 times. The most critical rule follows. No matter what you hear behind you, you cannot turn your head. You must keep your eyes locked on the mirror. Those who claim to have succeeded describe a sudden, freezing chill in the air and the sound of heavy scratching originating from inside the walls. The final stage occurs within the glass. People report seeing their own reflection begin to move independently, watching them, waiting, and eventually smiling, while the participant remains frozen. This sequence transforms the mirror into an active trap. Once the reflection moves on its own, the participant is no longer an observer. They have become the target. In December of 1974, Martha Whitmore followed these exact steps with 2 of her friends. What began as a joke quickly shifted as the clock hit 3:33 a.m. Witnesses say Martha stopped laughing and became completely rigid. She kept her eyes fixed on the mirror and whispered that a man was standing directly behind her in the reflection, though the room behind her was empty. The candle flickered out, and the room became silent. Martha began to cry, asking her friends if they could hear the heavy breathing coming from the darkness over her shoulder. During the following week, her behavior changed. She stopped sleeping, covered every reflective surface in her home with heavy tape, and claimed that the figure from the mirror was now standing outside her bedroom door every night. The Black Hour doesn't always claim its subjects immediately. It begins a 7-day psychological decline, acting as a countdown till the moment the door finally opens. Skeptics argue that these experiences are the result of a well-documented biological error in the human brain. Staring into a mirror in low light for an extended period causes the brain's facial recognition system to fail. Without enough light to define edges, the visual cortex begins to struggle. The brain attempts to fill in the missing data. It warps the reflection, creating monstrous features, or the illusion of independent movement during sensory deprivation. Once the participant looks away, the distorted features snap back into alignment. The entity vanishes because it was never outside their head. From a scientific perspective, the black hour is a harmless optical trick, a localized glitch of the visual system, but psychology cannot explain the physical evidence found in the Whitmore case. A brain glitch doesn't lock a door from the inside, and it doesn't shatter every mirror in an apartment while the resident disappears. There is also the problem of historical consistency. Identical accounts of scratching sounds and cold air and the 3:33 start time have been documented for over 100 years. These stories existed in isolated villages long before the internet or mass media could homogenize the details of urban legends. While we can't explain the hallucinations, the physical artifacts and the historical records suggest we are dealing with a variable that science hasn't accounted for. So if you wake up tonight at 3:33 a.m., pay attention to the sound of your room. If the house feels unnaturally quiet and you hear breathing coming from the corner of the room, do not turn your head. The moment you look away, you allow the entity to move. You provide the opening it needs to leave the reflection. Some old legends have survived for centuries because they contain a necessary warning. Ignoring them may be a mistake